Maya Rodriguez never imagined she'd be carrying a duffel bag full of ammunition through the dusty streets of Kandahar. The 23-year-old supply specialist from Texas had joined the army to pay for college, not to find herself in the middle of Afghanistan's most dangerous province. Her job was simple: transport supplies from base to base, keep her head down, and count the days until her deployment ended. The morning started like any other. Maya loaded her truck with medical supplies, MREs, and yes, ammunition for the forward operating base. She had done this run dozens of times before, always with a full escort, always following the same secure route. But today was different. Intel suggested the Taliban had moved away from the area, and command decided a smaller convoy would draw less attention. "Just you, me, and Sergeant Collins today, Rodriguez," said Lieutenant Kevin Morrison, a young officer fresh out of West Point. Maya nodded, checking her rifle one more time. She wasn't infantry, but every soldier in Afghanistan knew how to fight when necessary. The convoy rolled out at dawn, 3 vehicles cutting through the desert landscape. Maya drove the supply truck in the middle, sandwiched between 2 armored Humvees. The radio crackled with routine check-ins as they made their way through villages, where children waved and adults watched with careful eyes. Everything changed when they reached the narrow mountain pass known locally as Devil's Gateway. The road here twisted between rocky cliffs, with barely enough room for their vehicles. Maya had always hated this stretch. Too many places for an ambush, too few escape routes. The first explosion sent rocks tumbling down the cliff face. Maya slammed on her brakes as the lead Humvee disappeared in a cloud of smoke and dust. The radio erupted with shouting voices, calling for backup, reporting casualties. Through her windshield, she could see muzzle flashes from the rocks above. "Stay in the truck." Lieutenant Morrison's voice cracked over the radio, but Maya could see his Humvee taking heavy fire. Bullets pinged off her truck's armor plating as she crouched low in her seat. This was supposed to be a simple supply run. She was just the person who carried the bullets, not the one who fired them. The shooting seemed to go on forever, though it probably lasted only minutes. When the dust settled slightly, Maya could see the lead vehicle was badly damaged. Smoke poured from its engine, and she couldn't tell if anyone inside was moving. The radio had gone quiet except for static. Maya's hands shook as she reached for her rifle. She wasn't a shooter, she told herself. She was supply, logistics, the person who made sure others had what they needed to fight. But looking at the destruction ahead of her, she realized that sometimes the lines between roles disappeared in the heat of battle. The Taliban fighters were repositioning in the rocks above, and Maya knew they would come down to finish what they started. Through her side mirror, she could see movement in Lieutenant Morrison's Humvee, but it looked like they were trapped. The narrow road made maneuvering impossible, and the enemy held the high ground. Maya thought about her family back in San Antonio, about the college degree she was working toward, about all the reasons she had told herself she would never be in a situation like this. But as another burst of automatic fire shattered her passenger window, she realized that intentions meant nothing when people were dying around her. She grabbed her radio with trembling fingers. "This is Rodriguez in the supply truck. I can see at least 6 fighters moving down from the north cliff. They're trying to flank the lieutenant's position." Her voice was steadier than she felt. The response was immediate but grim. "Rodriguez, we've got 2 wounded and 1 KIA up here. Morrison's hit bad. We need immediate backup, but nearest support is 30 minutes out." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the ammunition crates in the back of her truck. She had always been the one who supplied the fight, never the one who joined it. But today, the fight had come to her, and there was nowhere left to run. Maya's decision came in a heartbeat. She couldn't sit in her truck while her fellow soldiers died around her. Grabbing her rifle and as much ammunition as she could carry, she slipped out the passenger door using her vehicle as cover. The Taliban fighters were focused on the 2 damaged Humvees, giving her a moment of invisibility. The rocky terrain was treacherous, loose stones threatening to send her tumbling down the mountainside with every step. Maya had never been the best shot in her unit, but she understood tactics from her basic training. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly to rain down fire on the trapped convoy, but they had left their own flank exposed. Moving carefully from boulder to boulder, Maya worked her way up the slope parallel to the enemy position. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure it would give her away. Every few seconds she paused to listen, hearing the ongoing firefight below and the occasional shout in Pashto from above. When she reached a position roughly level with the Taliban fighters, Maya could see them clearly for the first time. 6 men, just as she had reported, armed with AK-47s and positioned behind a natural rock barrier. They were methodically firing down at the convoy, taking their time to aim carefully. They thought they had all the time in the world. Maya's hands trembled as she raised her rifle. She had qualified as a marksman in basic training, but punching holes in paper targets was nothing like this. These were real people, even if they were trying to kill her friends. She forced herself to remember Lieutenant Morrison's voice over the radio, weak and strained. She thought about the soldiers trapped in those Humvees. Depending on backup, that was still 25 minutes away. The first shot surprised even Maya. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and she saw one of the fighters spin around, clutching his arm. The others immediately began scanning the rocks, trying to locate this new threat. Maya had lost the element of surprise, but she had their attention. American soldier on the North Ridge, one of them shouted in accented English, and suddenly Maya found herself in the middle of a very different kind of fight. Bullets started chipping rock all around. Her as the Taliban fighters split their attention between the convoy below and this unexpected threat. Maya rolled behind a larger boulder, just as automatic fire stitched across the rocks where she had been lying. She could hear them moving, trying to flank her position just as they had done to the convoy. But Maya had advantages they didn't expect. She knew these mountains from previous supply runs, and more importantly, she had been listening to their radio chatter. Using her military radio, Maya contacted the trapped soldiers below. "Morrison, this is Rodriguez. I'm engaging 6 fighters from the North Ridge. I can keep them busy, but I need you to be ready to move when I give the signal." The lieutenant's voice was weak but determined. "Rodriguez, what the hell are you doing up there? You're supposed to be supply, not infantry." "Today I'm whatever we need me to be," Maya replied, surprising herself with her own conviction. She chambered another round and prepared to move to a new position. The Taliban fighters were getting closer, and staying in one place meant getting surrounded. Maya began a deadly game of cat and mouse among the rocks. She would fire a few shots from one position, then immediately move to another before return fire could find her. It wasn't the most effective fighting technique, but it was working. The enemy fighters were confused, unable to pin down her exact location, and their attention was divided between hunting her and maintaining pressure on the convoy. During one movement between positions, Maya saw something that made her blood run cold. More fighters were approaching from the south, at least 4 additional men moving to surround the convoy completely. The backup she had been providing would mean nothing if the enemy reinforced their position. Keying her radio again, Maya's voice was urgent. "All stations, we have additional fighters approaching from the south. At least 4 more hostiles. We're about to be completely surrounded." The response from base was grim. "Understood, Rodriguez. Air support is still 15 minutes out. Hold your positions and try to stay alive." Maya looked at her ammunition supply. She had started with 90 rounds and had already used 20, against 10 fighters in defensive positions. Her small supply of bullets wouldn't last long. But as she watched the new group of Taliban fighters moving into position, she realized something that changed everything. They were carrying heavy weapons. Not just rifles, but what looked like an RPG and possibly a mortar. If those weapons got into position, the convoy wouldn't need to worry about running out of ammunition. They would be dead in the next few minutes. Maya realized she had to make an impossible choice. She could continue her current strategy, picking off fighters one by one while slowly running out of ammunition, or she could take a massive risk that might save everyone or get them all killed. The approaching heavy weapons team was setting up behind a cluster of boulders about 200 meters away, clearly preparing to finish the convoy with devastating firepower. The supply truck in the valley below contained more than just ammunition. Maya remembered loading white phosphorus marking rounds and several cases of fragmentation grenades intended for the forward operating base. If she could somehow get to that truck and use those supplies, she might be able to turn the tide of the battle. "Morrison, I need you to listen carefully," Maya whispered into her radio, trying to stay quiet as Taliban fighters moved closer to her position. "I'm coming down to my truck. When I give you the signal, I need every working weapon you have to lay down covering fire on the North Ridge. Don't worry about accuracy, just make noise and keep their heads down." Rodriguez, that's suicide. You'll be completely exposed crossing that open ground. Maya checked her remaining ammunition again. 43 rounds left. Sir, with respect, we're all dead anyway if those heavy weapons get set up. This is our only chance. Without waiting for a response, Maya began her descent. Moving from rock to rock, she worked her way down the mountainside toward her truck. Every few meters, she could hear voices calling to each other in Pashto, the Taliban fighters coordinating their search for her. Halfway down the slope, Maya's foot slipped on loose gravel, sending a small avalanche of stones tumbling toward the road. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, and immediately she heard excited shouts from above. They had found her general location. Bullets began striking the rocks around her as Maya abandoned stealth for speed. She half ran, half fell down the remaining distance using whatever cover she could find. A round tugged at her uniform sleeve, another sparked off her helmet. She could feel the heat of near misses as she finally reached the relative safety of her truck. The vehicle had taken several hits during the firefight. Spiderweb cracks covering the windshield and bullet holes punched through the passenger door. But the engine was still running, and more importantly, her cargo was intact. Maya threw open the back doors and began grabbing specific items: the white phosphorus rounds, a case of fragmentation grenades, and every loose magazine of ammunition she could find. Now would be good. She called over the radio, and immediately the air filled with covering fire from the trapped Humvees. It wasn't much, probably only 2 or 3 working rifles, but the sound of automatic fire echoing off the canyon walls made the Taliban fighters duck for cover. Maya loaded a white phosphorus round into her grenade launcher and aimed at the heavy weapons position. The marking round wasn't designed to be a weapon, but it would create a brilliant white smoke that would blind and disorient anyone nearby. She pulled the trigger and watched the round arc toward its target. The explosion was spectacular. White-hot phosphorus scattered across the enemy position, creating a cloud of dense white smoke and forcing the heavy weapons team to abandon their setup. Maya could hear screams and shouts of confusion from that direction, but her position was now completely exposed. Taliban fighters from the original group were moving down from the North Ridge, and she was standing in the open beside her truck with nowhere to run. Maya grabbed 2 fragmentation grenades, pulled the pins, and threw them as hard as she could toward the approaching fighters. The twin explosions sent rock fragments flying in all directions and bought Maya a few precious seconds. She dove behind her truck, just as automatic fire began chewing up the ground where she had been standing. The vehicle's armor plating was taking a beating, but it was holding for now. Rodriguez, we've got movement from the south side, too. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. Whatever you're doing, do it fast. Maya looked at her remaining supplies. She had used her phosphorus round and 2 grenades, leaving her with conventional ammunition and her rifle. The heavy weapons team was disorganized but not eliminated, and the original fighters were closing in from multiple directions. Then she remembered something from her supply training that might change everything. In the back of her truck, buried under medical supplies, was a case of thermite grenades intended for destroying sensitive equipment if the forward base was ever overrun. Thermite burned at over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit and could melt through steel. Maya had never used thermite as a weapon, but she understood the principle. If she could get close enough to the enemy positions, the intense heat and molten metal produced by thermite could be devastating in the confined spaces between the rocks. The plan was desperate and dangerous, but looking at the tactical situation, Maya realized desperate was all they had left. The backup was still 10 minutes away, her ammunition was running low, and the enemy was regrouping for a final assault that would overwhelm the damaged convoy. She grabbed the thermite grenades and keyed her radio one more time. All stations, I'm going to try something crazy. Be ready to move when I give the word, because we're either going to break this ambush or we're all going to die in the next 5 minutes. Maya's plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. She would use the thermite grenades to create chaos and confusion among the Taliban positions, then try to reach the heavy weapons that had been abandoned during her phosphorus attack. If she could turn those weapons on the remaining fighters, she might be able to break the ambush entirely. The biggest problem was distance. The thermite grenades had to be placed precisely to be effective, which meant getting dangerously close to enemy positions. Maya studied the terrain, looking for any route that might provide cover for at least part of the approach. A dry creek bed ran along the base of the northern ridge, carved by flash floods during the rainy season. If Maya could reach that creek bed, She could move closer to the enemy positions while staying below their line of sight. The only problem was the 30 meters of open ground between her truck and the creek bed. Maya made her decision. She grabbed her rifle, slung the thermite grenades across her chest, and took a deep breath. "Morrison, I need covering fire in exactly 10 seconds. Pour everything you have at the North Ridge." "Rodriguez, this is insane. You're not trained for this kind of assault." "Neither were the farmers and shop owners who fought at Lexington and Concord," Maya replied, surprised by her own words. "But sometimes regular people have to do extraordinary things." Maya counted down from 10 in her head, then sprinted from behind her truck toward the creek bed. The covering fire from the Humvees was limited but effective, forcing the Taliban fighters to duck behind cover just as Maya broke into the open. She made it 15 meters before the first shot started tracking her movement. Bullets kicked up dust at her feet as she zigzagged toward the creek bed, using every evasive technique she had learned in basic training. A round tugged at her backpack, another passed so close to her head she could hear the supersonic crack. Maya dove the last few meters, tumbling into the rocky creek bed just as a burst of automatic fire stitched across the ground where she had been running. She lay still for a moment, gasping for breath and checking for wounds. Amazingly, she was unhurt. The creek bed provided better cover than she had hoped. Years of erosion had carved a channel deep enough for Maya to move in a crouch without being seen from the ridge above. She began working her way upstream toward the enemy positions, the thermite grenades clicking softly against each other with each step. As she moved closer, Maya could hear the Taliban fighters talking among themselves. They were arguing about something, and she caught enough words to understand they were debating whether to continue the attack or withdraw. The unexpected resistance had clearly shaken their confidence. Maya reached a point directly below the main enemy position and began climbing carefully up the bank of the creek bed. Through gaps between the rocks, she could see 3 fighters huddled behind a natural barrier, reloading their weapons and scanning the area below for any sign of movement. The thermite grenades were designed with a 4-second fuse, which meant Maya would have to throw them and immediately seek cover before the molten metal started flying. She pulled the pin on the first grenade and lobbed it over the rocks into the enemy position. The explosion was unlike anything Maya had ever seen. Instead of the sharp crack of a conventional grenade, the thermite created a brilliant white-hot fountain that sprayed molten iron in all directions. The screams from the enemy position were immediate and terrible. Maya threw the second grenade toward a different cluster of rocks where she had seen muzzle flashes. The thermite detonated among stored ammunition, creating a secondary explosion that sent bullets cooking off in random directions. The psychological effect was devastating. The remaining Taliban fighters began shouting in panic. But Maya's position was now completely compromised. The fighters she hadn't targeted with thermite knew exactly where the grenades had come from, and they were moving to surround her position in the creek bed. Maya realized she had traded the element of surprise for temporary chaos, and now she was trapped in a narrow channel with enemies approaching from both directions. She keyed her radio with trembling fingers. "I've broken up the North Ridge position, but I'm pinned down in the creek bed. The heavy weapons are about 50 meters east of my position, but I can't reach them." Morrison's response was immediate. "Rodriguez, stay put. We're moving up to support you." Through the smoke and confusion, Maya could see one of the Humvees beginning to move, despite the damage it had sustained. Lieutenant Morrison was attempting to drive the vehicle up the slope toward her position, using the distraction she had created to break out of the trap that had held them all morning. But the Taliban fighters weren't finished. The heavy weapons team that Maya had disrupted with phosphorus was regrouping, and she could see them dragging their equipment to a new position. Worse, the reinforcements from the south were finally close enough to join the fight effectively. Maya counted her remaining resources. 12 rounds for her rifle, no more grenades, and a position that was rapidly becoming untenable. But looking up at the approaching Humvee, she realized that Lieutenant Morrison was taking an enormous risk to reach her. If his vehicle was disabled or destroyed in the attempt, the entire convoy would be lost. That's when Maya saw the opportunity that would define the rest of her military career. The heavy weapons that the Taliban had abandoned were still lying among the rocks where they had dropped them during her thermite attack. An RPG launcher and what looked like a light machine gun, just sitting there waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to claim them. Maya knew she had seconds to act before the Taliban fighters closed off her escape routes entirely. The abandoned heavy weapons were her only chance to turn the battle decisively, but reaching them meant leaving the relative safety of the creek bed and crossing open ground under enemy fire. She could hear Lieutenant Morrison's Humvee grinding its way up the slope, the damaged engine straining against the steep terrain. The vehicle was drawing heavy fire, but Morrison was somehow managing to keep it moving. Maya realized he was creating a diversion, drawing attention away from her position to give her a chance. Maya climbed out of the creek bed and began a desperate sprint toward the abandoned weapons. The thermite attack had left the immediate area covered in a haze of smoke and dust, which provided some concealment, but also made it hard for Maya to see where she was going. She stumbled over loose rocks, nearly fell into a shell crater left by her own grenade, and all the while bullets snapped through the air around her. One round passed so close to her face she felt the heat. Another struck her helmet hard enough to spin her around, but somehow she kept moving. The RPG launcher was right where she had seen it, lying next to the body of one of the Taliban fighters caught in her thermite attack. Maya grabbed the weapon and quickly checked it, still loaded, ready to fire. She had trained briefly with captured enemy weapons during her deployment, enough to know the basics of operation. But before she could use the RPG, Maya had to deal with the immediate threat. 3 Taliban fighters were converging on her position from different directions, clearly intending to overwhelm her with coordinated fire. Maya dropped behind a boulder and brought up her rifle. The firefight that followed was short but intense. Maya had 12 rounds and 3 targets, which meant she couldn't afford to miss. Her first shot dropped the nearest fighter. Her second wounded another. The third man dove behind cover and began laying down suppressive fire that kept Maya pinned behind her boulder. That's when she heard the distinctive sound of an American M240 machine gun. Lieutenant Morrison had reached a position where his gunner could provide effective support, and the heavy automatic fire was devastating the remaining Taliban positions. Maya used the distraction to line up a shot on the last fighter threatening her immediate position. With her immediate area secure, Maya turned her attention to the RPG. The reinforcements from the south were still approaching, and she could see them moving equipment into position for what looked like a final coordinated assault on the convoy. If she could disrupt their formation with the RPG, Morrison's Humvee might be able to complete the rescue. Maya had never fired an RPG in combat, but the principle was simple enough. Point, aim, pull trigger, and try not to be standing behind it when the backblast occurred. She shouldered the weapon and lined up her shot on the largest concentration of enemy fighters. The rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the canyon and exploded directly in the middle of the Taliban position. The blast scattered equipment and fighters in all directions, completely disrupting their planned assault. But Maya's triumph was short-lived. The backblast from the RPG had revealed her exact position to every remaining enemy fighter in the area. Automatic fire began converging on her location from multiple directions, forcing her to abandon the high ground she had fought so hard to reach. Maya grabbed the light machine gun she had seen earlier and began a fighting retreat toward Morrison's Humvee. The weapon was unfamiliar, but she managed to figure out the basic controls quickly enough to lay down suppressive fire as she moved. "Rodriguez, get to the vehicle. We're pulling back." Morrison's voice was barely audible over the sound of gunfire and the straining engine. Maya made a final sprint toward the Humvee, which had managed to reach a position about 30 meters away. The vehicle was badly shot up, smoke pouring from multiple holes in its armor, but it was still moving. The rear door swung open and Maya dove inside just as the vehicle began its retreat down the slope. Inside the Humvee, Maya found herself face to face with the cost of the ambush. 2 soldiers were wounded, one seriously, and everyone looked shell-shocked by the intensity of the fighting. Lieutenant Morrison was pale and had blood on his uniform, but he was still conscious and directing the withdrawal. "Rodriguez, that was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen," Morrison said through gritted teeth. "Maybe both." Maya was trying to process what had just happened. Less than an hour ago, she had been a supply specialist whose biggest worry was delivering ammunition on schedule. Now she was covered in dust and smoke, carrying captured enemy weapons and feeling like she had aged years in the space of minutes. But the fight wasn't over yet. Through the Humvee's rear window, Maya could see Taliban fighters regrouping and beginning to pursue the withdrawing convoy. The ambush had been broken, but the enemy wasn't giving up. They were following the damaged vehicles down the mountain pass, clearly hoping to finish what they had started. Maya checked the captured machine gun and found it still had plenty of ammunition. "Lieutenant, they're following us. If we don't do something about pursuit, they'll catch us before we reach backup." Morrison looked back at the following fighters, then at Maya. "What do you have in mind, Rodriguez?" Maya studied the terrain ahead. The road wound down through several more switchbacks before reaching the valley floor, where backup units would be able to provide support. But there was one more narrow section, almost like a bottleneck where a single person with a machine gun could hold off pursuing forces. "Drop me at the next bend," Maya said. "I'll set up a roadblock and buy you time to reach safety." Lieutenant Morrison stared at Maya in disbelief. "Rodriguez, you're not infantry. You're not trained for this kind of rearguard action. We stick together." Maya looked at the wounded soldiers in the Humvee, then back at the pursuing Taliban fighters who were gaining ground despite the convoy's head start. The damaged vehicle couldn't outrun healthy men on foot through the rocky terrain, and everyone in the Humvee knew it. "Sir, with respect, I wasn't trained to assault enemy positions with thermite grenades either. But that worked out okay," Maya replied. "This vehicle won't make it to safety with that many fighters on our tail. Someone has to slow them down." The narrow section Maya had identified was perfect for a defensive position. The road curved sharply around a rocky outcrop, creating a natural choke point where the pursuing fighters would have to bunch up to continue their pursuit. A single shooter with a machine gun could hold that position against superior numbers, at least for a while. Morrison was weighing the tactical situation when his radio crackled to life. "All units, this is Hammer Base. We show air support inbound to your position ETA 8 minutes. Can you hold for 8 minutes? 8 minutes might as well have been 8 hours given their current situation. The pursuing Taliban fighters were already within rifle range and closing fast. The convoy had maybe 2 minutes before they would be forced to stop and fight from whatever position they happened to occupy. "Do it," Morrison said finally. "But Rodriguez, you hold that position for 5 minutes max. Then you get out of there whether we've reached safety or not." "That's an order." Maya nodded and grabbed every magazine for the captured machine gun she could find. The Humvee slowed just enough for her to jump out at the curve in the road, and then continued its limping progress toward the valley floor. Maya was alone again, but this time it felt different. She wasn't panicking or improvising. She had a clear mission and the tools to accomplish it. Maya set up the machine gun behind a cluster of boulders that provided good fields of fire while offering some protection from return shots. The weapon was a Soviet-era PKM, reliable and deadly in the right hands. Maya had studied captured enemy weapons during her training, but using one in actual combat was entirely different from classroom instruction. The first Taliban fighters came around the curve at a run, clearly expecting to catch up with the fleeing convoy quickly. Maya let them get close, waiting until she had targets bunched together in the narrow space between the rocks. Then she opened fire. The machine gun chattered out a long burst that caught the lead fighters completely by surprise. 2 men went down immediately, and the others dove for whatever cover they could find among the rocks. But Maya's position gave her a commanding view of the entire approach, and there were very few places for the enemy to hide. Maya had learned something important during the earlier firefight. Sustained automatic fire was more about suppression than precision. She didn't need to hit every target perfectly. She just needed to make it impossible for the pursuing fighters to advance up the road. Every few seconds, she would fire a burst at any movement she could see, forcing the enemy to stay pinned behind inadequate cover. The Taliban fighters tried several times to flank Maya's position, but the terrain worked in her favor. The steep slopes on either side of the road were too exposed, and any attempt to move around her position would take time they didn't have. Maya's radio crackled with updates from Morrison's Humvee as it continued its withdrawal. "Rodriguez, we're approaching the valley floor. Backup units are moving to intercept. How are you holding up?" "Still here, sir." "They're not moving forward, but they're not giving up either." Maya ducked as return fire chipped rock above her head. "How much longer until air support?" 4 minutes. Maya checked her ammunition supply. She had started with 3 full magazines for the machine gun, and was already halfway through the second. At her current rate of fire, she would run out of bullets before air support arrived. But she could see the Taliban fighters were growing more aggressive, clearly realizing that time was running out for their ambush. That's when Maya heard a sound that changed everything. The distant rumble of helicopter rotors. American air support was arriving early, and the Taliban fighters heard it too. Maya could see them looking up at the sky, clearly debating whether to continue their attack or withdraw while they still could. The helicopter appeared over the ridge like an avenging angel, its door gunners immediately engaging the Taliban positions with devastating accuracy. Maya had never been so happy to see American aircraft in her life. But even with air support overhead, she wasn't safe yet. Several of the Taliban fighters had taken cover in positions that protected them from the helicopter's guns, and they were still intent on eliminating the lone American who had caused them so much trouble. Maya found herself caught between the pursuing enemies and the helicopter above, with friendly forces trying to distinguish her from hostile targets in the chaos of the firefight. Maya grabbed her radio and called the helicopter directly. "Air support, this is Rodriguez on the ground. I'm the friendly with the captured machine gun at the road curve. Multiple hostiles in the rocks above and below my position." The response was immediate and professional. "Copy that, Rodriguez. We see you. Marking hostile positions with smoke. Keep your head down." The helicopter crew dropped smoke grenades to mark enemy positions, then began systematically eliminating the remaining Taliban fighters with precision fire. Within minutes, the pursuit had been completely broken, and Maya found herself sitting alone among the rocks holding a captured machine gun and trying to process what had just happened. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Rodriguez, what's your status? Are you injured?" Maya looked down at herself, surprised to discover she was unhurt despite everything she had been through. Her uniform was torn and dirty. Her equipment was battered, but she was alive and unharmed. "I'm okay, sir. The road is clear. Pursuit has been eliminated." The rescue helicopter landed 20 minutes later, its crew medics immediately attending to the wounded soldiers from Morrison's convoy. Maya sat on a boulder nearby, still clutching the captured PKM machine gun, watching as the professionals took over the situation she had been fighting alone for what felt like hours. A senior NCO approached her, Master Sergeant Williams from the Quick Reaction Force that had been dispatched when the convoy missed its scheduled radio check. "You must be Rodriguez," he said, looking at the young supply specialist with obvious curiosity. "Hell of a thing you did up there, soldier." Maya wasn't sure how to respond. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a strange mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. "I was just doing my job, Sergeant." Williams looked at the captured weapons, the evidence of Maya's improvised assault on the Taliban positions, and the tactical situation she had created and held until backup arrived. "Rodriguez, I've been in the Army for 18 years, and what you did today wasn't your job. That was way beyond your job description." Lieutenant Morrison, his wounds bandaged but not serious, joined the conversation. "Sergeant Williams, without Rodriguez, none of us would have made it out of that canyon. She single-handedly broke up a coordinated ambush using captured weapons and improvised tactics." The helicopter crew chief overheard the conversation and walked over. "Ma'am, I've been flying combat missions in Afghanistan for 3 tours, and I've never seen anything like what you pulled off up there. Using thermite grenades as offensive weapons, setting up a solo roadblock with captured heavy weapons. That's some serious warrior stuff." Maya felt overwhelmed by the attention and praise. She had never thought of herself as a warrior. She was Maya Rodriguez from San Antonio, Texas, who joined the Army to pay for college and ended up carrying supplies through dangerous places. But looking back at the mountain pass where she had spent the morning, she realized that sometimes circumstances demanded more than anyone expected. The debriefing at base camp 3 hours later was unlike anything Maya had experienced. The battalion commander, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, had flown in specifically to hear Maya's account of the engagement. Intelligence officers took detailed notes as Maya walked them through each decision she had made during the firefight. "Rodriguez, according to Lieutenant Morrison's report, you had no infantry training beyond basic military skills, yet you executed complex small unit tactics under extreme pressure," Colonel Mitchell said, reviewing the after-action report. "How did you know to use thermite as an offensive weapon?" Maya thought about the question carefully. "Ma'am, I didn't really know anything. I just looked at what I had available and tried to figure out how to use it to help my fellow soldiers. The thermite was supposed to be for destroying equipment, but I realized intense heat would work just as well against people hiding behind rocks." The intelligence officer looked up from his notes. "The Taliban fighters you engaged were from a veteran cell that had successfully ambushed 3 previous convoys in that same location. They knew that terrain, they had prepared positions, and they had superior numbers. By every tactical measure, your convoy should have been completely destroyed." Maya learned during the debriefing that her actions had been more significant than she realized. The Taliban cell she had defeated was responsible for multiple attacks on supply convoys, and intelligence suggested they were planning to expand their operations throughout the province. By breaking up their ambush and capturing their heavy weapons, Maya had effectively ended a major threat to coalition supply lines, but the personal impact was even more profound. The 2 wounded soldiers from Morrison's Humvee were recovering well and would return to duty within weeks. Lieutenant Morrison himself had written a detailed recommendation for Maya's actions, recommending her for the Silver Star, one of the military's highest decorations for valor. "Rodriguez, I'm reassigning you effective immediately," Colonel Mitchell announced. "You're being transferred to the 75th Ranger Regiment for advanced infantry training. After what you accomplished today, it's clear you have natural tactical instincts that shouldn't be wasted on supply runs." Maya was stunned. The Rangers were elite infantry, the kind of soldiers she had always admired but never imagined becoming. "Ma'am, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm just a supply specialist. I'm not sure I'm cut out for that kind of unit." Master Sergeant Williams, who had been quiet during most of the debriefing, finally spoke up. "Rodriguez, I've served with Rangers, SEALs, and every kind of special operations soldier the Army has. What you did today wasn't luck or accident. You saw a tactical situation, made sound decisions under pressure, and executed complex operations while under fire. That's exactly what we look for in Rangers." 3 months later, Maya found herself at Fort Benning, Georgia, going through the most challenging military training of her life. Ranger School was designed to push soldiers beyond their perceived limits, testing not just physical strength but mental toughness and leadership under extreme stress. Maya struggled initially. Her fellow students were mostly infantry soldiers with years of combat experience, while she was still learning advanced weapon systems and small unit tactics. But the instructors had read her file from Afghanistan, and they knew what she was capable of when circumstances demanded it. During the mountain phase of Ranger training, Maya's patrol was conducting a simulated raid when they encountered an enemy force in prepared positions. The exercise was designed to test leadership and tactical decision-making under pressure. Maya found herself in command of the patrol when the designated leader was declared a casualty by the training cadre. Looking at the tactical situation, Maya realized it was similar to the canyon ambush she had faced in Afghanistan. The enemy held high ground with superior fields of fire, just like the Taliban fighters had months earlier. But this time, Maya had a trained team instead of fighting alone. Maya adapted the lessons she had learned in combat, using her team's supporting weapons to fix the enemy in place, while she led a flanking assault on their position. The raid succeeded completely, and the training cadre noted that Maya had demonstrated exceptional tactical instincts and natural leadership ability. 6 months after the ambush that changed her life, Maya graduated from Ranger School and received her tab in a ceremony attended by Lieutenant Morrison, Master Sergeant Williams, and Colonel Mitchell. She had transformed from a supply specialist, who just carried the ammo, into a qualified ranger prepared for the most challenging missions the Army could offer. But Maya never forgot where she came from or the lesson she learned in that Afghan canyon. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not by those trained for combat, but by ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances and choose to stand up when others depend on them. As she pinned on her Ranger tab, Maya remembered her own words from that desperate day. "Today I'm whatever we need me to be." She had discovered that being a soldier wasn't just about your job description or training. It was about being willing to do whatever was necessary to protect the people fighting beside you, regardless of what role you were supposed to play. Maya Rodriguez had gone to Afghanistan as a supply specialist whose job was carrying ammunition. She came home as a ranger who had learned that sometimes the person carrying the bullets has to be ready to fire them too.